just going back to the meaning thing quickly. So you let's say that you've got a skeptic in front of you, and they say, "Look, Justin, life's meaningless. I want my life to have meaning. What does Christianity offer?"
Well, I would say it offers what it says on the tin, Jesus Christ. I would want to have a bigger conversation about why they've arrived at this view that life is meaningless, and if there is anything that they do think of as meaningful, and if they have, if they have reached some kind of nihilistic viewpoint where they believe we are just, swimming in a sea of existential meaninglessness or whatever, I would simply, I guess, say to them, well, I believe in someone who claims to be the way, the truth, and the life. Have you thought about looking at him, his life, the things he said and did, and the way that his life, death, and resurrection have given a meaning and a purpose to many, many people beyond? I suppose it would be simple as starting at that point and encouraging them to consider the claims. In some ways, I think you're starting in a really good place with someone who's admitting the meaningless of life. I think the harder thing is actually people who say, "Oh, well, I don't need your meaning because I've got my own meaning," and we can all have our own meaning, don't you know? That's, I think, the harder thing to actually butt up against, because then you're having to kind of do the hard work of trying to, I suppose, undercut their view of meaning and why you don't believe it ultimately does amount to a truly meaningful kind of way of looking at life, and so on. So someone who says life is meaningless, at least you've got the point at which you can hopefully start to point them in the direction of, because I'm kind of assuming that the fact that it's meaningless depresses them in some way, that it kind of, that's a bad thing. And if that's the case, then I think you're on, you're on a good ground to start pointing them in the direction of something very positive, which I think is, going back to the Peterson thing, is exactly why he's been so, sadly before he kind of got very ill and sort of had to pause everything he was doing, he was so fantastically popular, was because he had put his finger on this meaning crisis, and suddenly all these basically young men, as far as I can see, majority of them, who were basically wasting their life watching porn and playing video games and not really getting on in life, suddenly had this kind of quite sort of get up and go guy saying just basically common sense things most of the time.
In your room.
Yeah, clean your room, make your bed, and all that. But kind of overlaid with this whole sort of, life is not meaningless because there is this greater sort of meaning, and people have been exploring this. Did a whole series on the Bible and the way it explores the human condition and meaning and everything else, and people seem to, in ways that Christians would have loved to see happen, sort of lapped this up and seen it as incredibly insightful, and people approaching him on the street in tears saying, "You've turned my life around," and everything else. And like London Theist, an interesting sort of wave of interest in Christianity and the Christian story. And we wait to see exactly what the fruits of that are in the long term. But I do get the sense that actually the meaningless crisis has created a bit of an open door for Christianity. I'm not saying it's the only thing that people are turning to, but it's one of the things,
Yeah, we do see people turning to all sorts of different things at the moment, trying to find meaning. And I think for me, it is that discussion around ultimate meaning and hope, and why. I think for me, it's kind of flipping it on its head. Why does it even matter? Any suffering? Why does it matter? Any? Why should I? The is and the ought kind of dynamic of why should I live in a certain way if there's no ultimate thing, being, mind, whatever it is, that kind of gets to this idea of theism, and then working from that. Well, if there's an ultimate being, and we can communicate with it, then there's a relational aspect, and that makes the most sense within Christianity. And you kind of have this conversation, and I liked how Andy Kind put it in a recent conversation, that the claims that we make are actually should be fairly modest, and that is what makes the most sense of the world around us. And someone in the comments there, I think it's a guy, someone named Digital Gnosis, has said that they can't necessarily see how things like living forever would make life all of a sudden more meaningful, and that is was it he said where did he say, sorry, Digital Gnosis, something about deconversion because of cognitive dissonance between what is taught and what we see in the world. And I personally don't experience that myself. I see actually a better way of viewing the world is that suffering there is a meaning behind it. I can get angry at suffering because there is a purpose for each individual life given to them from the one that made them. And I think
I'd agree with the comment that if the aim is just to live more eternal, just have eternal life, well, that doesn't buy you meaning necessarily. I totally get that. But if it's life with the author of life, with the center of everything, then that's actually probably stacked full of meaning. And that's the Christian claim. That's it's life in all its fullness is what we're promised, not just a never-ending kind of amount of, life that is basically looks like this life. It's a transformed life, which is, and that's a huge claim. I've obviously need to make the case for why I believe that kind of life is available to us, but I do believe it. And for me, that motivates me. It does give meaning. It does make sense of things. It's not to say that you can't live life with other kinds of smaller, lowercase m meaning in your life. Obviously, people get all kinds of meaning from family and friends and children and hobbies and careers and everything else. But for me, the problem with that has always been that all of those things you can get taken away and will get taken away, because there's this thing called death, and it just is the ultimate leveler of all of those forms of meaning. So however much meaning you build up, your family will not be there one day, your relationship can fail, your job, you can lose your job. There are so many things, and the question is, are you building your life on something that actually transcends all of those smaller m meanings? Because if you're not, then you will end up basically, there will come a point at which you have lost meaning. And for me, the extraordinary thing about Christianity is that people who have literally nothing can still live lives of joy, purpose, and meaning, because they've got this different kind of meaning in their life, this thing that transcends all of it. You look at the stories of people like Corrie ten Boom, who lost all of her family in the concentration camps and was able to write at the end of that, it's only when all you have is Jesus that you realize that all you need is Jesus. And that is a cliche in some ways, but it's actually that's coming from the mouth of someone who lived that and saw that and the truth of that. And the Apostle Paul, when he writes, what can separate us from the love of God? Can shipwreck, famine, the powers of this earth, anything in heaven or earth? He kind of realized that this thing called the love of God in Jesus Christ somehow transcended every circumstance of life. There was no circumstance in which we could be separated from this ultimate source of meaning and love. And for me, that's a pretty good deal. That's something that you simply can't get from any other sort of secular philosophy, which are ultimately contingent upon these meanings that will run out, that are inevitably limited in that kind of way.
There's just on that comment, and just with one more point that's been made on here with what if you desire something else? And my response to kind of go on with that is what we've talked about on our channel with a number of people actually, because we're all everyone we seem to get on it with here is a Tim Keller fan of some sort, and C.S. Lewis, and so we've talked about disordered loves, and I think our desires can take us towards these other meanings, and that's the whole point of living the Christian life is you follow a person, not the stuff that we might desire. So there is some sacrificial aspect of following Christ and acknowledging that, yes, we might desire other things that might well give us meaning for a time, but our ultimate meaning and desire is best found. That's the claim, is that it's best found when we find who Jesus is. And so I start to see the world through that lens, and you've got that often used.
Well, for me, it's all about, for me, the Christian worldview puts all of those things in their proper place, and all of those things can become, without God at the center, their own sort of mini gods, and idols of their own: family, work, romantic relationships, whatever. They're not bad in themselves, they're gifts of God to us, but they only find their proper place when they're in the orbit of God being at the center of any of them, and they actually become we become a slave to them if they are the thing we orbit around. And that's why so many people just do move from romantic relationship to romantic relationship, because they're looking for that thing which only God can obviously give them ultimately, and it turns from a good thing into an abusive thing because it's not being used in the way it was meant to be used. And so I mean that it's difficult, I think, to convey that to someone who doesn't share that experience that we three share in this regard. And I'm not saying that Christians are all super consistent in this either, because we're all, human, and we get pulled aside by those things, and we're all capable of turning them into mini gods. But there is something about the way that when we do put God at the center, it does make sense of all of those other things. We see them in their proper, as they're meant to be understood, rather than as being central in themselves.